And we're recording. Thank you guys for coming here today. Also, introduction to Jacob Lambeck, who is our new part-time in the office right now, and he's helping with office admin, and he will be helping kickstart and do introductions for right now. So, Jacob, you want to take that away?
Sure, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today in this virtual space. My name is Jacob Lambeck. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the recently hired program support specialist with the Sustainability Office. Just a reminder again, this meeting is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. So if you're not Hollywood Limelight ready, you're certainly welcome to leave your camera off or whatever you'd prefer. With me today, of course, is Maggie Songster and the rest of the South Face team. Unfortunately, Mike will not be able to make today's meeting, so he has left it up to us to carry on in his absence this month. He will be back in time for the supplemental CAD meeting on September 1st. That time of that meeting for September 1st is still to be decided, but we will send out that link as well with the time as soon as that's nailed down. With that being said, today we're going to keep rolling through our action areas. I know we have quite a few to cover today, and because we do have so many to cover, we will be limiting discussion and explanation to about 5 minutes per item to ensure we cover all the ones we need to hit today. So thanks so much, Maggie. If I forgot to mention anything, please feel free to chime in. And if not, Aaron and Megan, feel free to take it away.
Okay, great. So thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Jacob. Go ahead and dig on in. We're going to dedicate the bulk of the discussion to going through the next block of items for review. So tapping into the last few buildings and energy, moving into the community, environment, and transportation categories. We'll go ahead and start with our usual roll call, where I'll run through the name of the organization. And if I list, forgive me, if I list yours, please chime in and identify yourself by name. So we'll start with Athens Land Trust. Athens Land Trust. Action Inc. Action Inc. USGBC Georgia Athens branch.
That'd be me, Tom Lawrence.
100% Athens.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here, Michael Songster.
East Georgia Alliance. East Georgia Business Alliance. WNA Engineering.
Greetings, everyone. Amy Kassim.
Athens Technical College. Athens Technical College. East Athens Development Corporation.
Hello, this is Fred Smith.
Athens Housing Authority. Athens Housing Authority. Athens Area Home Builders Association. Athens Area Home Builders Association. Greenlink Analytics.
Good afternoon, this is Matt Cox.
Hey, Matt. From the South Face team, you have me, Megan O'Neill, and my colleagues who I'll leave to introduce themselves.
Aaron Gallagher.
Maria Weber.
All right, and Athens-Clarke County government staff.
Andrew Saunders representing Central Services. Brad
Andrew.
McCook, Utility Coordinator, Public Works.
Erin Jimenez, Athens-Clarke County Inclusion Department.
Is there anyone else on the call that had a chance to identify themselves? We'll move on. And please let me know if I need to speak more loudly. I'm on a new computer and my audio is struggling. So.
Yeah, every once in a while you get really soft and then it comes back real loud. So
Okay, I'll try to modulate appropriately. So here we go. We'll wrap up the buildings and energy pathway and move on to the community environment and transportation pathways. To date, we have been taking notes in real time on your screen. Fortunately, we have some additional note takers on our end today. So Erin and Maria will be taking care of that. Just as a quick recap, when I'm referring to action areas here, we're talking about the different levers or pathways through which to get to a clean, renewable energy transition. And so that can include a lot of different pathways, including mandates, voluntary programs, resources, and otherwise. And this is an image I found explaining how student loan financing works that I thought was a strong one in terms of explaining there are lots of different ways to get where you're going. All right, so we've broken down the different categories of action areas into 4 items: buildings and energy, which target financing, regulatory, information programmatic, and technology. We've gone through the bulk of these in our previous 2 meetings. We're going to wrap that section up and then get through as many of the other 3 categories as possible today. They are not as lengthy as the first one, and we'll reserve that time in the September 4th inter-session meeting to wrap up everything. So as Jacob referenced, we're going to, in the interest of time, we're allotting 5 minutes to each item. If we have time at the end, we can circle back to any items that we make note of that might warrant more conversation and go into greater detail as we need to in the future. All right, so with that, let me change my screen display over here. Is this zoomed in sufficiently for people to see? Should I zoom in a little further?
no more.
I can't see it. Megan, can you increase it a little bit, please?
I think it's right underneath view. Megan, there's a 100% button. There you go.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start with municipal efficient equipment procurement policy and hand it over to Matt to talk through pros and cons of some of these items.
Yeah, sure. So this is what would fall under the heading typically of like a green procurement requirement. So we're talking about having the city put in place a procurement standard that says all of the, in this case, focused on energy, all of the energy equipment that's purchased to meet municipal energy demands needs to hit a certain level of performance. Typically what's done with that is to say, like, you need to do Energy Star or Energy Star equivalent for pieces of equipment that don't have an Energy Star rating. So those, you could also see that applied beyond kind of appliances within the municipal operation. Like you could see this applying to like electric vehicle procurement also, to try to say, this is how we're going to phase in EVs as a part of our municipal fleet. So the difficulties around it are that it normally requires a certain amount of internal and political buy-in to get this adopted. So municipalities might see higher upfront costs, although the idea with a lot of these, especially the more efficient ones, or things like the electric vehicles, is that that's offset by the long-term operating costs of the equipment. So there is a return on investment, but you may not see it instantly. And then there are some good examples of reports and best practices on how to do this from US EPA.
Any questions or thoughts?
I guess maybe a question for Andrew Saunders. We already do this to some extent. You know, how widespread is it within the county?
Well, when we updated the sustainable building policy this year, we added some sections. One was for traditional building and facility maintenance, and the other, which would address our existing assets, and then also for like non-certified projects, so our smaller building projects, the requirement is to buy Energy Star or certified equipment where feasible. I think you and I have talked about there are some really peculiar things that government buys where there's not a standard. So one example of that we've run into is the equipment that we use to dry turnout gear for firefighters just doesn't exist. But I would tell you that this is already in effect locally to say an 80 or 90% standard within the government.
A great answer to have.
Great.
So the next item, if there are no objections to resetting the clock and moving on, is installing LED streetlights and traffic signals, which might be an initiative already in the works or planned.
So short version of this is, I mean, it's pretty much what it says. You know, you need to make an investment in LED street lights and area lighting, as well as traffic signals. Making that investment has an energy payback because they're more efficient. But there's also generally an operations and maintenance cost benefit that comes from this too, just because they last longer, so you don't need to send crews out to swap out burnt out bulbs at different poles. Payback for these kinds of investments is generally under 2 years at this stage in development where technology is. And that's for equipment that's normally going to last for 10 plus years and will reduce the energy consumption 5 to 10 times what's typically been installed, whether that was like a metal halide or a high pressure sodium kind of bulb that was out there for a lot of the street lights. You see pretty good efficiency gains. Primary challenge that folks run into are in program implementation because the financial case is so obvious to folks now. But you run into like really basic questions that probably would surprise folks. But like, how many streetlights are there, and who owns them? Become like real meaningful things that have to be figured out. Who's maintaining those? You know, and do we have the right count for how that's broken out? Are there other desirable changes that people want to make to the polls? We've seen, just in my experience, I've seen this particular effort get pulled into multi-year fights over stuff that had nothing to do with the LED replacement and everything to do with wanting to attach cameras and Wi-Fi and all kinds of other amazing whiz-bang technology onto the poles. So seems like those things might be minor issues, but they can really bog down the projects. On the other hand, the review that kind of like just having to do the work. That ownership review has identified significant savings for municipal governments in the past where they discover it's frequently the case that utilities are responsible for owning and maintaining streetlights that they then get a payment from the city for. And you will find in doing the audits of the counts there that it's not uncommon for those to be incorrect. And so we've worked with governments who found out they were being overcharged to a level that covered the cost of the energy manager who was overseeing it 4 or 5 times in that 1 year for the check that got sent back to the city. So there you can find some good things in digging through all of these records, but it is kind of a tedious work that needs to be gone through. There are some key examples out there. People kind of point towards Los Angeles as getting the platinum package because the LEDs are fully controllable, or they can be. They actually have the ability to turn on or off any of the LEDs that are in process across their city. So I kind of joked with them that they needed to invite like a DJ. He'd have his own DJ set going off that they could coordinate with their street systems. Simpler versions generally have fewer controls, and then obviously that's going to come at a lower price point.
Again, I'm guessing that Andrew has some answers on this, but do we still have any non-LED street traffic signals out there? And I know that we've replaced a lot of the street lights to LED, and the biggest issue there seemed to be the color of the LEDs, and they came in at a high intensity blue, which was objectionable, I think, to a lot of people. But Andrew, where are we on this?
So almost all, let's start with traffic lights. Brad may jump in to correct me, but my understanding is we're darn near 100% LED on traffic signals. That was an initiative of the early to mid 2000s. When it comes to street lights or roadway lighting, Georgia Power has retrofitted their equipment to LED. We have retrofitted the few things we own predominantly to LED. Where you see the remaining non-LED equipment is with Walton EMC owned equipment, some of Jackson EMC owned equipment. It's a mix with them, and I don't think we have very many items from rail. As Matt talked about, and I see we're out of time, it needs to be done with those remaining folks. There is some policy disagreements that should be resolved, mostly around the fact that they want to charge 2 to 3 times for the same product.
You covered it, Andrew. That was Walton is the one holdout we're having some issues with, but everybody else has gone LED.
Item is developing little microgrids for critical infrastructure.
Okay, so with this one, we're looking at, because we're in that regulated monopoly space, this isn't something that you can really just spin up all on your own. So it's going to be partnering with a utility to develop microgrid projects. Probably you're going to need to provide local leaders with an understanding of what those are and how they can serve communities. So in general, microgrids are going to allow one section of the larger energy grid to island, which is speak for operate independently, through a separate set of generators and through their own set of wires. And so that enables the end users that are connected to the microgrid to actually keep power on if the rest of the grid goes down. It can also allow for new clean generation sources to meet the energy demand of the specific customers that are attached to the microgrid. The main challenges for this is that microgrids are not cheap, and they're typically viewed as redundant. So you're adding infrastructure on top of infrastructure that was already there. However, you're doing that potentially for a resilience benefit. As noted, if there's a blackout on the rest of the grid, the microgrid can island and can operate. And you also may be doing it for environmental reasons, to just say this group of customers wants to have their own dedicated clean energy supply to them at all times. Utilities generally are a bit hesitant to make those investments for customers without significant political pressure. They'll argue, and frequently correctly, that the costs of developing the microgrid are likely to be spread across their entire rate base. So it'll be shared across all customers, even though only a smaller subset will actually benefit from the infrastructure. And that'll be characterized or caricatured, depending on the utility and the context, as an inequitable cross-subsidy, especially if the beneficiary of that microgrid is a wealthier district or a university. Due to the degree of customization and specificity that's required, it can also be difficult to generalize cost estimates or performance from one project to another. And the last thing I'll say on this is just not all the power on microgrids is clean. Frequently, these are going to be set up and they may be running with gas or diesel generators. Either like they could operate fully that way, or they could be part-time or backup, but it's not always the case that just because you saw a microgrid that it was 100% clean energy, non-fossil powered. The best example I've seen recently came out of Pittsburgh. So the Pittsburgh airport completed their microgrid with a lot of statements about how they were trying to avoid living through an Atlanta-style long-duration power outage, if you remember that from a few years back. It took them about 3 years to develop it, and I swear in every single press release they called out Atlanta's outage as the reason they were doing this.
So Matt, I guess, how does this fall under our clean energy? I mean, we'd only do it if the energy were being generated from a renewable source. I mean, like, so can you do these with solar? And can you do it? I mean, if you can target a rich neighborhood, can't you? I mean, is this a way to actually target a census tract or a neighborhood that is low income to reduce their energy costs?
You could do all of that. Yeah, you could do this through solar and storage and set it up to be able to run completely, completely in parallel. You could drop that into a specific neighborhood. The main thing to flag there is just the barrier that you're going to run into and needing to partner with the utilities to make that happen. So, Georgia Power has one that they're piloting with Georgia Tech right now. Emory University asked for the same treatment in the last IRP and was shot down.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of it's been a pretty peculiar one-off pilot process in Georgia so far.
Is this something that, I mean, that Athens-Clarke County could potentially take some of the, buku's funds that are coming down for infrastructure and American Rescue and all this other stuff, and basically kind of do a pilot project where they supplement, they work with the utility, use some of our own funding to make it happen, and again, target a low-income neighborhood to test it out and see how it works? Or
I think you could, and you might have more success talking with the co-ops about doing something on this front. There would be really, you just need the co-op itself to agree. In that case, you wouldn't also need the approval of the Public Service Commission. So that may be a better option in that case.
Matt, I had put this is Shane. I had put a question in the chat, but I want to know how much do one of the microgrid cost, and how much does one microgrid cover, as in an area?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer that because they're all specific to the amount of load that you want to bring into it, how many homes of what kind and what businesses are on that particular grid, and then which resources you choose to power it. So it ends up being really close to impossible to just generalize around what the cost itself will be, unfortunately.
Well, then how do we develop you got here to develop local microgrids for critical infrastructure. So how do we develop it?
I mean, if we defined what the critical areas are and what those loads were, then you could start to define, you could put the parameters around to say, this is the area that they cover. This is what their load looks like. These are the resources that we want. We want it to be solar and storage. Like you could start to create a set of specifications that could lead you towards a cost estimate of that.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we've got an item that ties in pretty closely to earlier items, which is improving lighting in municipal buildings.
Did we do this already, Andrew, or?
I'm going to estimate 80 to 90%. So we've done all of the high wattage outdoor lighting to LED. And what we're finding with the audits we're implementing now is what I would call as mop up. You might find some smaller fluorescent bulbs that are in outdoor can lights or things of that nature. But we've taken the bulk of this off the table already through implementation.
Okay.
Next up is floating solar.
Do we have any suitable water bodies? I think I would ask that question.
We could look. I did not do a scan to see that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something.
Mhm.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes.
So the two likely ones, obviously we have water bodies, Lake Chapman being one. What we don't have there is a ton of offtake. We would need a partnership with the utility. But then you look at Bear Creek Reservoir that we are a part owner of would be well suited to this, and they have a high energy demand nearby. And eventually we will own a quarry for water storage. And I've talked with a few installers about, could you use this technology on a reservoir that moves by as much as 100 feet? And the answer is maybe. So short answer, I'm sorry, to a very long explanation is, yeah, it's worth a discussion. But for those who don't know, Matt, and I'm sorry to have jumped in, please explain to everybody what floating solar is.
Good thing. So most municipalities are exploring rooftop opportunities. Kind of less explored and definitely less done right now is solar on water bodies. There's a whole handful, probably 10 or 15 different commercial designs that are out there right now. And they're being used to deploy things from 10 kilowatt systems to gigawatt scale systems. I mean, there's a huge variety in the amount of solar that's being supported by these installations. But the main reason they're interesting is that it gives you another opportunity to deploy solar on a surface that's kind of otherwise unused. So similar to your roof. Financially, it's a little more expensive, generally somewhere around like 50 cents to $1 per watt installed than your rooftop application. And you can run into issues where it's a little harder to connect that energy back up to the grid, just like Andrew was talking about. If there's not on-site demand, then you also generally run into a spot where you're going to need to sell the power back to the utility, which might be significantly less favorable financially. So that's another thing just to keep in mind. The most prominent one near us is going to be the one that Orlando has installed, which I say prominent, not that it's necessarily the biggest, but they're very good about getting media attention to it. So they've got a 32 kilowatt system that the Orlando Utilities Commission has installed. And there's lots and lots of press about it.
Cool.
Next up, develop and deploy smart grids and or meters.
So this is really trying to deploy smart meters as an enabling technology of a lot of clean energy activity that could happen. A lot of utilities took a lot of their stimulus money from the last round, the 2009 stimulus bill, to make investments into smart meters. So like, for example, Georgia Power did that, and they're at like 98% smart meter penetration right now. They're way up there. But what the smart meters themselves do is that they really enable communication. So it lets appliances and equipment in the buildings, they have the ability to communicate through the smart meter to the grid operator, which can allow for automated energy management and load flexibility to happen, which is kind of the next frontier in value streams as far as utilities are concerned. Main challenge to this around deploying smart meters themselves has been financially. So if the utilities didn't use the money that they got out of the stimulus bill and they're trying to do it now, they have to make an argument to their regulators or to their boards to get the money that's required to procure and install the equipment. And you've also seen a lot of utilities struggle to develop programming that actually makes use of all the functions that smart meters have. So you can run into skeptical regulators who have heard the stories of we let the utility rate base all of this equipment with this promise, and they haven't realized it. So you can run into some hesitancy as far as permitting the utilities to go ahead and make those investments. There are some great examples out there. My favorite one's from Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Gas and Electric did a massive expansion of smart meters in their service territory, and then they launched a smart hours program. And so that's paired with an app, and it will send a signal to each of the homes to let them know, hey, this is the stress level we're expecting on the grid. This is the kind of price effect we're expecting to see. And you can opt in or opt out of allowing them to have any control over the space heating or space cooling equipment that's in the home. But what they found is most people did participate in those programs, and it helped them delay any rate increases for 6 years because of it. Don't know if we have any questions on that one. Maybe everybody already knew all about smart meters.
The smart group here.
Do we know, I mean, is like Jackson and the EMCs, how are they doing with smart meters? I knew Georgia Power did that a while back, so.
We can look that up. That is public record. So I don't know off the top of my head, but that would not take long to run down.
And does Georgia Power actually utilize many of the functions that they have through their smart meters? Because it seems like they just use it for automatic billing.
Yeah, that's the main complaint from the Georgia Public Service Commission staff. So they're one of the regulators who would give you we let you rate base this and what have you shown us for it. You hear comments that are the main thing that we let you rate base this millions and millions of dollars of investment, and the main thing that we got out of it was that you fired a bunch of meter readers.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
from
all
what
they
I know, my people, like I know in Georgia Power, they internally cost justified it just with that. Although they did come out and state after Tropical Storm Irma came through a few years ago that they were able to document that they got their service back up maybe close to 2 days faster because they had all the smart meters installed. They can target their service calls, and they basically do exactly who was on and who was off. So that's one of the biggest advantages that they are taking advantage of in special situations.
They're
launching some. I was just going to say they are launching some new efficiency programs also now that will take advantage of those, like communications between programmable thermostats, like a Nest thermostat is now being integrated, but it's taken a while to get those up off the ground.
So I know in our service area, Georgia Power and Jackson EMC have smart meters. Unfortunately, I'm not aware about Rail or Walton EMC and what they're at. But what I would offer is this. Athens-Clarke County has smart meters for its water meter, and that allows us to empower the customer with a tremendous amount of information at no additional charge just because they're customers. I personally have a good bit of frustration that specifically with our largest utility in town, you can only get access to that information under some model where there's compensation exchanged, whether you're prepaying a bill or offering a subscription or otherwise. So I believe there's good potential here.
It looks like Walton has done an awful lot of smart meter deployment as well. And Rail, while we're at it, Rail has done some. They're showing about 19,000 smart meters deployed. But I think they've still got, they probably still got some more to do there to get to 100%.
So that concludes the building and energy pathway. And we'll migrate over to the community pathways item here, which got about 9 items to get through.
Megan?
Yeah.
I have a question. On my worksheet, there were a couple things that I don't remember that we got through, like update building energy codes and increase code enforcement, energy operations manager, municipal energy task force, solar co-op on a previous sheet. Did we do those and I just forgot, or?
Those would have been the ones we went over in the July meeting and then the supplemental meeting that we did the beginning of August.
And I was present for both of those, and I know that we got through many, but I thought we stopped at, we stopped somewhere before we had finished the last of those on page 4. I don't know. I don't have notes as to exactly where we stopped, but did we actually do that? Do you have notes in yours? Did I miss that? Because I was there for both of those meetings through their entirety. Does anyone else remember?
I'm trying to look to see.
We're looking on our end too. Okay, so we will come back to those. We're just gonna insert them in this tab, Aaron or Maria, if you don't mind just dropping them in here, and we'll migrate back to them once those are in there. Just to give them a moment to track those down. Right, and for now, let's go ahead and move on to this spreadsheet. And Michael, thank you for surfacing that so that we can make sure we get through those as well. So incentives, education, programming.
This one's pretty straightforward. We talked before about how you've got utility programs, state, federal programs that are providing funding or assistance to help clean energy activities go forward. But it's almost always the case when we run our surveys that we find like half of the population still has no clue that these things exist at all. So one thing that we are suggesting as a possible good here would be to promote people's awareness of those existing programs because the money's there. And we just may have, half the population unaware that there's something that could help them out there.
I think that that's a good idea. I mean, I mean, in building houses, I don't take advantage of many of them. Sometimes Georgia Powers are a little bit difficult to wade through and figure out how to participate. So I think that having not only an awareness of what's out there, but the process to go through to get them applied would be worthwhile.
Seems like the thing here is gonna be, who do we target and how do we target them and how do we get that information out? And I feel like there's probably, when it comes to education, that may be something to really think about for that office and for the new hire, the new person who might be hired. Is just, it's one thing to put information in a water bill or to post it on the website or something, but how do we really, I mean, that's a key question, to really have the community buy in and take advantage and pursue stuff. So I think that's just a big question that's sitting out there is, how do we handle education and awareness in the community? Yeah.
A real challenge, and this can take different forms in different places where maybe it's a website where you consolidate everything under the sun, or maybe it's a physical location people can go to and learn more. And as cities pass increasingly aggressive policies with more complex compliance requirements, it could be a great forum to do education events or training contractors on how to comply with local laws. Or if you have a PACE program or a green bank, it could be an information source on those diverse types of programs as well. So this can be smaller, it can be really big.
One thing that our office is trying to, oh, I'm sorry. One thing that our office is really striving to do is make sure that we have the capacity in order to put forth more education. Like we recognize as the Athens Office of Sustainability that we can offer a lot of insight, and we have a lot of capacity potentially to promote this education into the community. So right now, as we're trying to overhaul our website and make sure that the educational pieces are there, we also are working to make sure that we have space and time in order to improve our relationship with the community so we can have the educational resources that they need in order to come and talk to us. We want to be the experts of the community so that everyone in the community can figure out what we have going on here and we can make consecutive decisions from there.
item is the water efficiency business certification.
The main thing here is to try to set up and then encourage business owners to obtain a water efficient certification for their operation. Water use is going to require energy, so there's that water energy nexus connection to this. So if we're able to save water, then that's going to translate to saving energy, and then that's going to represent an indirect way to bring the energy related emissions down.
Doesn't
Few
Athens-Clarke County
ways.
have a program? I mean, I don't know how well advertised it is, but
We have the Certified Blue program. It is
Yeah.
predominantly focused on restaurants. I think there's an opportunity to increase its application to more business types and an increased emphasis on actual like, retrofits within the businesses. Although, to be clear, the restaurants are doing some level of conservation retrofits within the kitchen area. So we've got to start.
Which is great. That puts you ahead of where I think Atlanta is, where they technically launched one and then really didn't have it go too far. It gets kind of stopped too much activity now. There are a couple of things out there though that can help with certification and trying to expand it. So you do have EPA has their Water Sense program that operates kind of like a water version of Energy Star. So you can have some tie-in to the Water Sense program. There's also a water audit standard that South Base and Greenlink and a bunch of other groups helped pull together a couple years back. That can give a good sense of like how to actually go through your facility and identify opportunities for improvement, how to make those assessments. So there's some resources there. It sounds like we've got a foundation in Athens to build off of.
Next up is community engagement and communication on clean energy efforts.
I would say this is a necessary component of any sort of equitable clean energy transition. Government is going to have to establish and maintain accountability and credibility with the public, and that's going to need you're going to need to be informing everybody on your current programs and progress, while also empowering the public to play a leadership role in developing some new programs and policies and thinking through things just like we are right now. The reason that this doesn't just become like a duh thing, but instead gets put on a list like this is that a lot of cities have made pledges in environmental and energy areas over the years and just have failed to yield substantive results. And part of that is just due to a lack of accountability and a lack of regular communication. Occasionally that's acknowledged, but it's frequently dismissed as a capacity issue. And I might be a little more strident about it, but I think that misses the point that those activities are required if government is going to be working in the public interest and are looking to support a well-functioning democracy, which I think is kind of the reason that they're there. So there are some new accountability frameworks that have been released that try to help explain how to pull together information and report it back, and how to do community engagement. Sierra Club put one together that we helped them write last year. There's also the GEM process guide that Greenlink has produced that does a lot of the same. How do we bring a data conversation to community and help everybody understand and speak to this information and what they'd like to see happen. Yeah, this seems kind of not as voluntary as some of the other ones might be on this one. If we're gonna do this right, we need to do it.
Workforce training collaboration.
So this will be working with trade schools, local universities. Sorry, can folks hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Working with the trades themselves to help develop a clean energy workforce. So as we do a transition, we're going to have to spend a lot more money on new ways of doing things. The nice part about doing that is that we're going to create a bunch of jobs when we do that. So if we take an intentional effort around that, we can start to train up a clean energy workforce that can make sure that our goals are met and the economic development opportunities occur equitably and for folks that are in the community. The key challenge for a lot of this is that you run into a chicken and egg problem. Nobody wants to train a workforce for jobs that won't materialize. So if there's concern that this transition isn't, fully committed to, and that there's not significant backing policies to support it, then you frequently see kind of lukewarm, sure, we think this is a good idea, but we're not really going to put serious effort into trying to do that workforce development.
It seems like this is a pretty key to our plan. Given some of the goals we've set in terms of equity and economic development, job growth, and so it seems like this needs to be a pretty high priority. And just who are the partners that we need at the table to make this happen, including industries or even potential entrepreneurs, who could start businesses, and, maybe the Economic Development Office, and is it the Office of, can't remember what the Crystal's office is, inclusion. And also, just to be sure that we are including the chronically underemployed in our community in this whole process. So, I mean, this to me is, there's not a lot of answers here, and there's obviously not a template for what to do necessarily, but I feel like this has got to be one of our biggest priorities.
I did drop into the chat a series of case studies that were pulled together by ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. So we do have examples that we can call from and then decide what works for us, to help with the picking and choosing of which components to bring in.
All right, clean energy and equity planning.
Pretty similar to the one we talked about a couple of these ago, but this is kind of more in the weeds of just one aspect of that. So this is just the ongoing outreach to make sure the public's aware of the progress that we're making and that we're able to continue to get citizen input throughout the process. That's going to start, the planning process is going to start with like benchmarking, so just collection of things like greenhouse gas inventories or like the energy burden maps, like where are we today kind of materials to figure out where we're starting from. Up through developing a plan, which, hello, part we're on right now, to the passage of specific policies and accountability for the implementation of those policies. So at its core, this is about good data and good community engagement, and that's actually where the challenge can be for a lot of folks, making sure that we have good data, that we've got good community engagement processes.
Solarize is next, and I believe fairly familiar to this group.
Yep. So Solarize, there's been a few of those in Athens at this point. This is partnering to reduce costs for bulk purchases of solar, and then also battery storage frequently kind of rides the coattails right now. This be led up by the private sector, but there can be municipal support. In Georgia, the private sector tends to ask for that municipal support when they're launching a program. They offer significant savings just because you get a whole bunch of people to sign up and commit to purchasing solar, and then that makes it so that you have some economies of scale and it's cheaper to do the bulk buy. The registrations are generally limited time events. So the more number of people you get to sign up in the shorter period of time, the greater the savings are to everybody who ultimately gets solar. Primary challenge for these is that they're generally successful with high and moderate income households, but they really struggle to engage low income households, and they struggle to engage commercial customers for totally different reasons. On the commercial side, it's that the sales cycle and the approval process is typically longer than the registration period. So they may have a solarize effort that's running for 3 or 4 months, and it may take a year and a half to get approval for the kind of investment that would be required. So that stops a lot of commercial projects from going forward. The low income side is just the upfront capital required. So if the cash isn't available, or if the credit scores aren't there that would allow them to kind of take out a loan to finance the investment in solar, then you run into some issues related to access. Any questions about that one? Okay. Megan just told me to move on to the next one if she's not not here. So energy efficiency demonstration projects. This is where we're looking for the government to support or implement or both innovative energy efficiency projects. So you have, there can be aggressive efforts to produce like super high performance buildings that will go forward.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
This is Fred Smith. I was having some tech problems. Before we move on about the topic we just left, are there examples of other projects around the country where inclusion has been a part of it, and how it impacts low wealth communities? Do we have anything to go on? It seemed like we kind of vague about how, I know this kind of cutting edge stuff, but it seemed like we kind of vague about how that can work, or how it's going to work.
So I think there's examples nationally of how to do solarize in a way that does better engage the low income segment. Generally, that's through pairing solarize with a separate financial instrument. So that might be grants, or it could be through some of the different financing options we talked about in the prior meetings that allow for like much lower cost of money to be made available. That's not anything that we've seen done in Georgia yet. And there are some regulatory barriers that would make it more challenging in Georgia to go ahead and stand up. But if you had something like one example we talked about before, if Athens had a revolving loan fund or a equitably focused green bank, they could be the source of capital that made it so that the low income segment could participate in the Solarize program.
Okay. Do we have, I know I've been kind of away from this conversation, and for a while. Do we have any type of work group or committee area where we are trying to focus on that area to see that that we will make a difference?
I think that's probably more a question for the Athens team.
So formally, no, and I think that could be a natural evolution of this body and other interested parties. Informally, there are some folks that are working on green jobs pipeline in town that are also very focused on how to make energy efficiency and solar more accessible in the community. So there's a lot of work ahead on a pretty important tool here.
Okay, I guess maybe it's just me, but I think that should be an important part of our work.
I definitely agree.
All right. So the next item, Matt.
Yeah, so we started to get into this a little bit, but you'll see folks pursue really high performance buildings occasionally. So it might be like a LEED Platinum or a Living Building Challenge. There's a few of these certifications that are out that really go to like the next level of what you can do with the building and its resource use. And one of the things that comes from those is an opportunity to help everybody else learn from it. So those projects, if they are publicized, can increase learning. They can show how deep decarbonization can be achieved. And so one role here that government could play is to help publicize those projects. Point out this is how they're operating, this is what they've done. And if the building owner and manager of a game, then and frequently they are because they want to show off what they just put their money into. They'll do tours and trainings and that kind of thing to try to get other people aware of how cool their bright and shiny new toy is. The challenge for these is that the efforts that go into that frequently don't scale very easily. So they're kind of more expensive investments beyond what a standard building code, building built to code would be. And so achieving widespread change through these efforts is unlikely, but there is recent research that's come out to show that these efforts do have catalytic effects and they do help change building practices. So it may not mean that every building is immediately going up to LEED Platinum, but we can help educate the rest of the building community on how to do things a little bit better through this.
I don't know if it's a little too granular for this plan, but if it's not, I would like to see this plan recommend that in the short term, Athens-Clarke County build a net zero or maybe net zero facility, and then that could be a strong educational tool and lesson for us that we can do ourselves and share with others.
I think that's a cool idea. I mean, I'm sure there'd be skepticism about the cost and the value of it, but I think you can make the case for, we were just talking about education and workforce training and that sort of thing. I mean, if you could kind of combine that center is a perfect, be a great, you could have combining opportunities for training people there, that if it can serve multiple purposes, I mean, and such a tangible thing that you can see, I mean, it's like, I feel like that's something that if you sold it right, could get the community around it. I think that's
Yeah,
a good
not to preordain things, but when you look at the SPLOS programming, there's actually 2 youth facilities coming online in this community, and that seems to be a good opportunity for education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think like that. So there's a lot of potential. I mean, I think things like that people, you can really, it's something, it's material and you can start thinking about how it could be used. And, there's a lot of specifics you could build into that pretty easily that would make it, yeah, I like that idea personally.
It doesn't have to go all the way to net zero too. I mean, there's not black and white, along that.
At the same time, people like very succinct goals, and net zero is a very succinct goal. And I think that the great benefit to doing something like that, Andrew, would be kind of getting us over the hump where there's a lot of resistance to the notion that we can go much, beyond, 10 or 15% above code. And I think that what people will realize is that actually there's a lot of room there, that the ceiling is not nearly that low. And so I think it would be good to have a demonstration project just to convince people who would otherwise never be convinced without seeing it.
And just to offer, if anybody in here ever has a chance to go in the Candida building at Georgia Tech, I'll give the nerds a little bit of a shout out here. It's a living building, so it's essentially, my understanding, is pretty close to net zero, water neutral, and a whole host of other benefits. But it's interesting. It's nice to see the technologies they've used, some of the lessons learned on operation, and they can talk to you about the upfront costs that are associated with it. So I think that'd be a good asset here.
Yeah. All right, we've got 2 more to wrap up this tab.
Yeah, so community solar is kind of an interesting term because it's now grown to talk about a bunch of different stuff. So I'll talk about the 2 most prominent designs and try to spend most of our time on the one that's going to be most relevant to us. There's one example. The one that's most relevant to us is where the utility will build a utility scale solar installation, and then they will sell blocks of capacity to customers of theirs who want to offset their regular grid consumption with generation coming from those panels. And so Georgia Power offers a program like that. I'm pretty sure Walton offers a program like that. I don't know about Jackson or Rail. I wouldn't be surprised if they had one or if they tried to connect it through Green EMC, which offers a bunch of those for a lot of the EMCs across the state. The flip side of that is that there's no guarantee that that solar installation is necessarily near your community. Now, Georgia Power, with one of theirs, they did put it near Athens, put one of their 2 capacity installations near Athens. So that is one case where it was like, cool, that works. Generally, you pay a premium in order to participate in those programs. They don't offer them to you at cost. There's a plus up that's charged by the utilities. The other option, which is kind of the original option for this, was that you would have a utility that would build solar close to a particular community with the intent of providing power to that community. So it would operate kind of like a community scale power purchase agreement. You see less and less of that now that the utilities are just offering bigger ones that are going to be right in line with their regular business development practices. And to do that in Georgia would require commission approval, and you'd have to jump through a couple of regulatory hoops in order to try to make something like that happen. So the one that's going to be most relevant is the one we spoke about first, where the utility is going to develop some solar, and then people can buy some of the capacity, can reserve it for themselves.
So I think that there's an idea that's somewhat adjacent to this. It's not truly community solar, that that's been discussed on and off recently. Andrew and 100% have had conversations about this, but that ACC is actually a solar owner on multifamily buildings and then negotiates rates where residents are getting the solar that's produced for less than retail, and ACC is recouping their investments so that they're not running afoul of the gratuities clause. And so I think that I don't know what it would take to get enough people on board to see the value in that, or to ACC to be willing to take on that responsibility. But I do think that that's like I said, it's sort of an adjacent idea to this. It would be on a single property, but it would be most likely on a multifamily property.
Yeah, I'd say as far as the planning goes, probably the first step to that is to, I don't know, not investigate, but identify the regulatory environment for Athens-Clarke County to be the provider on a SEPA. And really, I've already had some work from UGA that says it's legal. The main question is that valuation question. How would you value the service in a way that passes the various legal tests? But I'm with you. I think it's a place we could be innovative in the nation.
I think that sounds great. It'd be a great way to help with energy burden stuff too at the same time. I mean, there's all kinds of wonderful tie-ins if you can get through the legal piece of it. Beyond the last one?
Yep.
All right. So community choice aggregation, if we wanted to be real short about it, this isn't legal in Georgia, so we may not care. What happens in a CCA is that the municipality is able to purchase electricity from different generation sources on behalf of residents and business within their community, and then they can sell that. The popular option in the states that do permit them, which is only 8. So there's only 8 states that have these active right now. But what they do is they allow the local government to enter into power markets and into contracts without needing to establish their own utility to do so. Originally, they were designed to provide cities with an opportunity to prove that they could meet power demands at a lower cost than the incumbent utilities. It's kind of like a free market challenge that was issued, and those were successful. They've now become one of the leading means for cities in the states where they are legal to buy renewable energy to meet the needs of the entire community. And so you see that these are popular right now in Massachusetts, Ohio, California, Rhode Island, Illinois, New York, and then there's some activity in New Jersey and Virginia, and that's the entire set right there where you can do these. You would have, if we wanted to do this in Georgia, we'd need to go to the state house and start a process to get enabling legislation passed. On the plus side, we have seen whole cities take themselves to 100% renewables very quickly through this type of program. But here we got to start writing a law.
That we can go on to the next tab, and I can give Matt a quick break. And
Well, I did have one. I had a question. Hi, guys. Matt, how is the expectation on that particular one that it just is unattainable in Georgia, or it's just too much energy expended to get it done?
I think it'd be worthwhile trying to do if you got a coalition of the cities that are all pursuing clean energy goals together to kind of raise their voice collectively. I think you'd have a better shot at being heard. But I think unless that kind of coordination was brought to it, yeah, it's probably not something that we can consider as a serious opportunity, at least not in the next, not in the short term.
But in the 2035 window, that might be a possibility. So instead of paying absolution for our sins at the end of the time period, we would hopefully make that transition to allow 100%, as in real. So is it worth
Yes.
keeping in? Is
I
it
mean, I
long term?
would. I mean, I would leave it in as something that you don't want to forget about. But I think, yeah, it's not going to be one of the ones that you come out and say, in the next 5 years, we're going to do this. But it, to your point, might be one of the ones you say in the next 15, we want to make sure it doesn't fall off of the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Now you get to break. You're
No.
muted. Now you're back, Megan.
Now?
Yes.
Thanks. So now we'll move on to water efficiency bulk purchasing, which is a similar concept to a solarized program where you would leverage collective demand and economies of scale to buy a large number of water efficient appliances. Any initial thoughts?
So, has this been used effectively anywhere, and how does its adoption compare to, say, rebates or discounts that are funded, on the other side?
Right. To my knowledge, and I'll fact check this with Matt, this has not been deployed elsewhere so much as it's been identified as an opportunity for savings either across businesses or residents. And I would imagine that similar to what you would do with this solarized type program is as you're scoping it out, you would identify incentives that would be available locally to help offset some of that initial cost.
What segment of the water using community are we talking about here? Because it seems like federal mandates on fixtures have gotten water use down pretty low, and I'm not sure how much opportunity there is, like how many products there are out there, say, that reduce your faucet flow down below the 1.2 gallon a minute, or your toilet below 1.28 or whatever. So where would this be focused?
So some of the more common problem areas are your toilets and your shower heads in existing buildings specifically. So you're right, in new construction and new codes, there's calls for more efficient products, but there are a lot of existing buildings, especially homes, with some very inefficient products in place. And especially in the residential space, to replace these on an individual basis where the homeowner is making that decision can just seem prohibitive from a cost and a labor standpoint. So when you talk about a more organized program that can help with that procurement aspect of things and just make it an easier process while driving the cost down as well through also sharing that cost of installation, can be an appealing pathway.
Is there any way, Andrew, you were talking about how in Athens-Clarke County, our water meters, we can see, I don't know exactly what it is that we can see, but it sounds like we have smart meters. I mean, is it something where Athens-Clarke County could do kind of an audit of water usage and target certain neighborhoods or areas that seem to be, where this might be a benefit? I mean, the one thing I can see is our problem we've talked about before is in some of the more lower income neighborhoods. I mean, it's not just a question of putting in fixtures. I mean, you've just got, once you go down that road, you've got so many other issues with their plumbing and stuff, but.
Yeah, so I'd actually made a note for later of a few of these kind of oddball Athens things that I think make sense. Based off of the experience the sustainability office had on the West Broad conservation work, where you really want to put your public dollars is in what I would call water loss intervention, which means in the big scheme of things, we would rather you have a more efficient toilet or a better shower head, but the real water savings comes with chronically leaking infrastructure held on the private side of the line.
Okay.
So there were multiple cases in the West Broad neighborhood where there were leaks that amounted to thousands of gallons per year and thousands of dollars of bills being passed on to those customers, where the intervention and fix was less than $800.
Mm-hmm.
And we now have the data that we can identify those and start an education process, but we need to have it with these paired supports. Well, if you can't afford to address this, we can't afford to keep letting it go, right? So we need to connect on that. And if you were to even just fully fund that, and I'm not saying we should, but if you were to fully fund every, let's say, underground water leak on private property, it's far cheaper than building a reservoir. So need some time on that.
Andrew and Megan, would it be with the infrastructure bill coming down, would it be better to try to get money from that to help purchase some of this equipment that we will need in the future?
Yes, and I know that it'll need to be carried forward, but when we were kicking around some internal ideas, our previous public utilities director, before he retired, actually made a proposal consulting with the sustainability office that this would be a potential source of those federal funds.
Cool.
Okay.
So I think to Andrew's point, the idea is to expand the concept out because it's really linking those together where we're doing this mitigation on leaking pipes combined with water efficiency of internal fixtures. But given the two, the priority would be, I think Andrew's right on the recapture on the pipes. We are set to try to begin to investigate that from our ends to start narrow down areas. We're going to start trying to do that. So we narrow it down to attainable segments, focusing primarily on income-based approach, starting and working up. And then I think to Shane's point, trying to wrap that in with grants is probably got some potential. So I think in our materials in our report that we need to kind of highlight that level of detail, that this is that we break this out into much more actionable steps.
It seems like, and this is, that if we were, I mean, if there's a significant amount of work, a pretty labor intensive effort, potentially, if we really were to get the funding and go at it and just, target every one that, maybe there's an opportunity here for some job training and job creation among, again, chronically underemployed populations that, we could and might even be able to get some additional grant money towards that. If we pair a job training program with an effort like this.
That sounds like a great idea.
Thanks, Fred.
right, next item is Rounded Up Energy and/or Water Efficiency Program, and I see Matt is back.
Yeah, so rounded up programs have gotten some success across the country to fund both energy and potentially water efficiency upgrades. They focused on the low income bracket. What you do, the reason they're called what they are, is that you literally round up the bill to the nearest dollar. And whatever that difference is, 75 cents, 25 cents, whatever, goes into a fund specifically for low income efficiency improvements. Those have been the ones that are designed as an opt-out program. So you're in it unless you say, I don't want to be. Have been very successful in establishing sustainable funding for low income efficiency work across their communities. The challenge that you normally run into is that utilities need to agree to operate as a funding agent and a program overseer, even if they farm out the administration and the implementation. They still have to use their bill system to collect the money and set it aside. And then there's overheads in terms of doing the actual contracting itself. So you kind of need a willing participant to come in and help. But there are several good examples, including some good ones from the Southeast. So Knoxville, for example, has had their Rounded Up program in place for the better part of the decade and pretty consistently provides more than $500,000 worth of funding towards low income work in the city, which is great. That's more than most cities that don't have this kind of program in place are going to bring to the table.
How does that, how do you make that happen? And what's the?
Yeah, so you'd have to go through the utilities to do it. So it's and you could do either side of that, but you'd be looking to talk with Georgia Power, where I assume it's probably a non-starter. The EMCs might be a better place to begin to try to get some buy-in on the electric side. And then the water side, you'd work with the Athens, I'm blanking on the name of the water utility, but you'd work with the water utility.
Yeah,
There you
public
go.
utilities. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Is it?
You'd work with them to set that.
I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody. I mean, Georgia Power has it's not only just round up, it's you can also dedicate a certain amount of money every month. So they've already got a program in place with Project Share or something like that.
They have one that they run with the Salvation Army. Yeah, that's a donation.
So you're probably right. It's probably a non-starter because they already have one program, but it certainly could be something. I wonder if it's something we could work with our public utilities department on to start a similar type program.
I think we could, and we actually already have a project share kind of deal with the water utility, and that's a partner with Salvation Army, I believe, or it might be with Goodwill. I can't remember, but yes, I think my opinion, and again, this can all be in the weeds later. Implementation is best done in partnership with nonprofits and community agencies, so that you don't have to commingle donated funds and government funds and worry about all that.
All right. The next item, everyone's favorite, renewable energy credit procurement.
So Matt, you want to kind of briefly recap what that is?
Yeah. So what we're looking at in this case is hopefully organized bulk purchases of credits for renewable energy generation. It's literally a sheet of paper or PDF that grants the buyer the rights to what's called the environmental attributes of a megawatt hour of renewable energy generation. This is a common way that the private sector acquires, quote unquote, acquires clean energy, because they will get the credit for having brought those megawatt hours of clean energy onto the grid.
So we're essentially buying this energy from a location far, far away, and we're paying for it in Athens. It's being generated in another part of the state or the country.
With one tweak, you're not buying the energy, you're buying the credit for that energy being produced.
Yeah.
And lawyers that are in the REX markets will get into crazy deep nuances and the differences between all that stuff.
So
But
in essence, it promotes generation of clean renewable energy at a national or state level rather than local level.
So, I personally, I mean, Matt, based off of what y'all shown us before, Rex will have to be a part of this discussion. To the degree that it's deemed viable, I think the emphasis should be on locally sourced Rex, whether local is within the community, the region, or the state. I'd kind of prioritize it in that order, but specifically, I'm interested into the way that Rex might be used to bridge the gap for low-income residents to also access the technology. So I know you can't double count the energy, right? But I had an informal discussion a while ago with a funder who felt like if the government would backstop the RECs with an agreement, that they could make solar available at or below cost of regular utilities for low-income residents. So it was an interesting discussion.
I mean, that would be. It can be. So if we knew where they were and that they were local, then we can figure out the carbon impact. I think that's kind of the other challenge with the RECs is that you don't necessarily know where they are or when they were generated, so you can't really tell how much carbon they avoided. If it was a windmill that was generating in the Pacific Northwest right next to the massive dams that are up there, then you probably didn't save a whole lot of carbon. Whereas if it was a windmill that was in Texas or a different part of the Midwest, that might have been much more impactful. But the only thing that you're going to get on a REC is this little certificate that says you're responsible for the environmental attributes of this megawatt. One thing that's just kind of interesting and noteworthy for us, one of the largest REX traders in the country is located in northern Georgia, up in Alpharetta. That's where their headquarters are. So that's Sterling Planet. They helped EPA design the REX programs when they were getting launched in the 90s. So we do have some local folks that know an awful lot about it.
All right. Carbon offsets.
So functionally, this is pretty similar to the REX, but instead of buying the rights to the environmental attributes, you're buying the avoidance or the removal of 1 ton of CO2 emissions. Those are actually kind of breaking into 2 different markets nowadays. So avoidance offsets are frequently much cheaper than removal-based offsets. I think that probably makes sense to people if you think about it. It's a lot easier to switch over to LEDs and claim that you avoided some tons of CO2 being produced than to create a CO2 vacuum cleaner or to plant a whole bunch of trees or something along those lines and then wait until you've recovered that cost. So in the ESG corporate sustainability world, there is more of a focus now to try to shove folks to do more of the removal based offsets because they're viewed as more significant.
I had an interesting conversation. Working forests comprise about 65% of the state, and had a conversation with a guy who was essentially selling to put folks out in Oregon and California energy credits in Georgia, and what carbon offsets in Georgia, I should say, carbon offsets. And what he was doing is timber companies would normally, for example, harvest their pines at year 25, and he was looking at this exponential growth curve on the pines when they store the most amount of carbon. And it's also about the time that timber companies actually harvest the trees. And he was paying them on an annual basis to delay just a year each time. And by doing that, it offset that year's worth of carbon production. And it was a really fascinating kind of concept. Unfortunately, he was looking at 10,000 acres. I was kind of looking at it at city level, and he's going, no, we're looking at big stuff. So it is, but I think that is another where we're keeping it more regional, more local, and we're also having a direct effect on carbon production, and we are growing bigger trees. And of course, then when the growth rate starts going back down, that's when we can offset it till that curve starts turning the other way, and then they'll harvest. But it is an interesting concept to look into.
The big questions that come up there is, can we prove the savings and how long are we going to see them demonstrated? And then now you've got questions around their sustainability for different reasons. So Brazil had a very big program for this that was operating, and then their federal government has now started to do clear cutting and burning of the forest land that was being sold as offsets. So there's some questions in that. And then California also had a lot of forest land that was producing offsets that were part of this market that have just been burned by the wildfires out there. So there are some concerns that you'd probably, just to get back to the legal side, you'd need to think through what are your contractual obligations and the options for the parties around these kinds of circumstances. We may be better situated in that case than, say, California is to avoid the ravages of the worst wildfires.
So again, this is kind of an adjacent notion to this, but 100% has been looking into for a couple of years and has talked with the Athens Community Foundation about like a local offset program, and we were looking at a program that was up in Ithaca, New York, where people would essentially purchase these offsets, and the money would then be used for low income weatherization and equipment upgrades, and that's where the offset would come from. And obviously there's probably a lot of fuzziness in the way that was put together, but the basic notion of the money kind of staying local and people within the community buying the offset personally, but then it going to fund improvements for low income residents, I think is something that has some merit.
All right. We've also got updating and publishing greenhouse gas inventories.
So the idea here is to try to update existing or produce new inventories that are going to let us track our emissions. It's going to be pretty important if we're trying to hit our goals. The greenhouse gas inventories are today kind of regarded as a bare minimum to show a commitment. to reducing emissions. It's kind of like benchmarking energy use for commercial buildings. Like this is the first thing that you're going to do if you're going to start to get serious about what your levels are. If you publish the results of an inventory in a public location, that can help keep everybody informed and serves as a pretty basic piece of an accountability strategy. Challenges for this? Oh, yes, sir.
Is this related to just things that we're installing, or are we trying to do this on a community-wide basis?
Community-wide. You can do both. I mean, you can look at like a municipal greenhouse gas inventory and the community-wide inventory. And that can be, a lot of communities do break it out that way. So they can say, this is how we're doing as the government. This is how the whole community is doing it. That's pretty common practice.
So what are the challenges?
Well, most
It's a pain in the butt.
Most local governments rely on some outdated and low resolution software for this, and it kind of fails to accurately capture what things are actually driving their local emissions. So this will be things around like, when are they using energy, because the carbon intensity of the energy supply changes, all the time. What's the geography for that's being captured? Like, do we actually appropriately characterize the sources of our energy supply? Have we appropriately understood our energy demands? And most of what's out there right now uses the standard that's out there right now uses annual coefficients to try to approximate for a lot of that. And what we find when we go deep into this to say this is what's actually going on in each hour, a lot of local greenhouse gas inventories are off by 30% or more. And so there's occasionally academic literature that gets published, or this will turn into like splashy news coverage where somebody tries to audit these with a more sophisticated approach and comes back to say, these inventories are pretty dramatically off.
So is this something that would require a data wonk? We'd have to hire somebody who's really into it and spend their time? I mean, what kind of commitment level are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the stuff inside of the Athens ACEs model that does do this hour by hour and can be used for a better sense here. Continuing to do it beyond that does probably require, I mean, this isn't like a full-time person's position, but it is a lot of data collection that needs to go into it. We're working on trying to make a better national standard that folks can tap into and be able to do this without needing to set aside separate staffing, but can't say that I'm going to have that, ready in a week or anything like that. Or it's a big lift.
Yeah, cities use very different approaches to this, where some might have a smart intern serve the function of the data collection from the different relevant departments and input it into a fairly standardized platform that's available through ICLEI, which has some of the gaps that Matt identified. And then others will hire external consultants and pay them to do it. It kind of runs the gamut, and there is a definite need for some standardization of processes. So hopefully Matt will make that work for everybody.
We're trying to talk with ICLEI to get better back-end data put into their tool because it's what most folks are using.
So I would see as part of this to have a cost benefit kind of, I mean, we want to have some kind of estimate for level of commitment. Because I think it's something we need to do, but I have no concept of what the cost would be to get it done.
And our timekeeper is doing an excellent job of flagging where we are in the meeting time. So we've got about 6 minutes before we need to migrate back to the PowerPoint for our formal wrap up. So we could move on and cover one more item, or if there are any other lingering questions, we could address those. All right, net zero water code it is.
Okay, so this is building on the excitement around net zero energy codes. You now have folks pushing net zero water codes. So the part where it's similar to the energy side is that you want to make sure that the amount of water that's quote unquote produced on site matches the amount of water that's brought onto the property. That's about where things get a little bit weird and different though. So you're looking at the total amount of water consumed against the water that's going to be obtained from rain or gray water reuse versus what's returned back to the wastewater system. So the principle that's different is that you're not really looking at water that's being generated on site in the way that you're looking at electricity that'll be generated on site for a net zero energy building. The net here is really more about offsetting and avoiding sending water back to the wastewater system and using water capture and reuse to do that. The codes, net zero water codes are newer and they're less implemented. So this is kind of a little more theoretical at this stage. However, the federal government has been rolling out some pretty strong efforts in this area through their federal energy management program. They've connected the two, and so they have guidance that you can go see how each of the different major departments across the federal government are approaching net zero water efforts in their properties. So, you know, defense has a different one than Homeland Security, but we can go mix and match and compare.
And what comes to mind is we've got like the Purple Pipe program that's ongoing. It's being launched. And we have our stormwater utility that, you know, perhaps putting more effort into slowing water. And I mean, it used to be that they tried to get water to go very quickly into waterways, which of course created erosion and flooding issues. And I think having something in there addressing stormwater, slowing stormwater down, especially in protected floodplains, and trying to get it to infuse. There's Brian Bledsoe has a software program that he developed, and according to him, he can get to the parcel level with determining the most likely infusion areas for water, according to his software. And so what I saw that is the potential is identifying, you know, when construction comes in for redevelopment or for development, you begin to use that to start identifying areas you want to protect to have the water go there so it infuses better, stays on site longer, and creates the summer flows for our streams. So I certainly could see something along those lines of the purple pipe and something addressing stormwater runoff on a more conservation infusion level. I kind of wonder in Georgia with what right now, of course, we have lots of rain. We have gone through drought. How that would play with most people not even have to worry about it, and other folks like industry having to work hard to stop it or to get to zero.
Yeah, I guess I just don't have any idea, like, what would be required, like for typical new construction residential, or commercial or industrial, like what actually would be required? What would that add to the typical cost of something? But I mean, it seems like obviously a great goal and a great place to get to. I just don't know, maybe this will be Andrew Saunders' idea of the net zero energy building. Maybe it also includes some of this because it's what, include some of the net water thing to just show people what the techniques are. And then maybe at some point there's an opportunity for Athens-Clarke County to partner with a developer who's doing a project and, to just help get some of this on the ground and have people see what it looks like. And I don't know if at some point there will be rebate programs or incentive programs at the federal level for property owners who retrofit to do this. I don't know what kind of regulations do we have? Do we have regulations that allow this? Are there things about gray water and that sort of stuff that we need to change the ordinances locally? I don't know. It seems like a cool idea. I have a lot of questions. I don't really quite know how it all works, but.
And Amy, to your point, they do, the more you reduce, as you know, through the utility, the more you reduce the runoff and impervious surface, the less your bill, your utilities. That's kind of the, that's kind of your reward. It would be nice if we could enhance that a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okey-doke. So we are about 4 minutes left and present. There we go. And we are at the conclusion and wrap up part of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Maggie Songster to wrap us up.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for that. I know it was a lot of information and we were trying to make sure that we could do it in the most time conscious way as possible since we have so many items. We got through a lot today, but we have around 18 items plus the other ones that we need to cover from the last meetings over. And so what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be having another and probably one of the last supplemental meetings on September 1st. We still need to actually kind of sort out the time a little bit, so apologies about that, but we'll get back to you. Imagine that that's like a TBA. And so we'll get back to you about appropriate times. Looking forward to that. Most likely we'll have to set this meeting to be an hour and a half in order to have enough time in order to make sure we get through all the items. If what we're also going to be doing as well is that if you feel like in all of these policy toolkit meetings that we have had so far, you have questions or if you're confused on some of the topics, or if there was a meeting that was missed and so you weren't able to join it, what our team is going to be doing is that we're going to be setting up supplemental one-on-one phone calls. So that will be between our office as well as South Base, where we can get on a phone call with you for around an hour to basically do a crash course of everything that we've done so far and try and do a summary of all the policies that we've talked about so far. I will be doing my normal touch base phone calls and email reach outs, so you guys are more than welcome to just kind of use that as an opportunity to check in, but we will have these available if you feel like you need to do a deeper dive than the normal check-in calls that we have. Other than that, what we're kind of looking towards once we wrap up on all these policy toolkits is that we're going to start soliciting your opinions and your thoughts and feelings as to what is the most important elements that we need to pull from these policies and what is the general direction that we need to be going that. As of right now, we're shooting for that to be in the September meeting. So that's what we're going to be looking for. That's why it's so important that we've set up these supplementary phone calls to make sure that you have as much information as available in order to give your insight and opinion from an informed place. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We are more than happy to answer whatever questions you have. Jacob, Mike, is there anything that I've missed at this time?
I think you said it well.
Okay. Well, Thank you everyone for coming today. We're really excited that we're getting through the bulk of this, and we are excited to keep chipping away at this. So thank you guys so much. And I'll be ending the live stream as well.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, well done, guys.
Well, one second, it's still live for a second. Mike, I think because you are the host now, you might have the ability in order to stop the live stream.
Uh-oh.
Wow, this will be a simple fix.
Because I'm on an iPad.
Well, so how about we do this? We'll all leave the
Oh,
meeting.
here we go.